Now, I know that Game Week 34 has only just started, but there's already plenty to talk about. And in this video, we're going to go through players to buy and avoid ahead of Game Week 35. All right, we're going to start off, as I do most of these buy and avoid videos recently, by looking at the upcoming fixtures we've got. And the game between Crystal Palace and Aston Villa is currently going on in the FA Cup. So I'm just going to check the latest score on that while we flash this table up. So what we've got here is a historic view. It's 0-0 at the moment in that game. Game Week 33 and 34, obviously 34 in progress at the moment. Looking ahead to 35, 36, 37 and 38. We've got 4 game weeks left to go this season, right? And I think there's a couple of things you need to consider when you're making transfer decisions for the rest of the season, right? One of them is the potential double game week in 36, right? So the two teams and their two respective opponents in the Premier League that make it to the FA Cup final will double in 36 likely and blank in game week 37, right? So right now in the FA Cup, we've got Aston Villa and Crystal Palace playing one another, and then we've got Nottingham Forest and Man City playing one another tomorrow. So if those teams, depending on who wins the FA Cup semi-finals, basically, they will double along with their respective opponents. So if Aston Villa beat Crystal Palace, then Bournemouth and Tottenham are going to play Bournemouth and Tottenham in game week 36, which means Tottenham will also have a double game week in 36. And if Man City beat Nottingham Forest, who are deemed to be the favourite in that game, they will double playing Southampton and Bournemouth will double as well, playing Aston Villa and Man City. And then obviously, if those are the most likely two scenarios that happen. Of course, that game, Aston Villa Crystal Palace could go either way. If Crystal Palace win that game, of course, they'll play Tottenham and Wolves will have a double game week in 36. And all those teams will blank in 37. So that's something you've got to be conscious of, right? You might have players in your team already from those teams. You probably do, given the double we've just had in 33. Most managers probably on their free hit for 34. So you need to have in mind that. You also need to have in mind, do you want to buy players ahead of game week 36? And then you need to think about, well, how many players do I have that are doubling in 36 that I need to sort out who blank in game week 37? There's quite a lot to think about there just in terms of fixtures. Given we're sort of coming towards the end of the season, we've got 4 game weeks left. I'm starting to wonder what I'm going to do with my time, to be honest, when I've not got FPL videos to make. But with that in mind, I think any transfer decisions you make have to be done with those fixtures in mind. And then I think also with the league table in mind as well. So it's quite common where teams that kind of have their season wrapped up, well, they tend to be kind of on the beach for towards the end of the season, let's say. Unless, of course, they're playing one of the relegated teams. So I would probably, any team sort of above 11th in the league at the moment, I would say still have something they can fight for probably until near the end of the season. There's European places that I guess even teams like, even Bournemouth could probably get up there. If they beat Man United, they're on 52 points, go clear of Fulham and then only 5 behind Villa. And then it's an absolute dogfight for those Champions League places between Newcastle, Man City, Chelsea, Forest, and, well, even Aston Villa are up there as well, aren't they? I think Arsenal and Liverpool, pretty safe, and Liverpool obviously tomorrow could win the title against Tottenham, right? So with all of that in mind, I would be looking to probably avoid the teams that don't have anything to play for. So I'm thinking Brentford, Palace, Wolves, Everton, Man United, Tottenham and West Ham. In my mind, I think it's just the nature of the Premier League and just competition in general, right? They're obviously going to go out there and try in all the games they play, but particularly like teams like Man United and Tottenham, the managers have made clear that the Europa League is going to be their team's targets, right? Not that really anyone's got Man United and Tottenham players anyway, but that's just something to bear in mind. And teams around them, Brentford, Crystal Palace, Wolves, they're all safe, right? They'll be fighting for just league position basically. And I think towards the end of the season, motivation may kind of drop off. I guess the one thing we don't have this season that we did last year was a Euros, and I would say, if you just put yourself in the position of a Premier League player, right? You've got football in the Euros coming up in the summer. Your team's league position is wrapped up. You're going to think differently about going into like a 50-50 challenge, for example, or really trying to make a sprint to defend or whatever, risking a hamstring injury or whatever. You're going to think differently in that situation. But this season where they've got a summer off, that might change the mentality a little bit because players aren't like saving themselves for a competition in the summer. Some are obviously in the club. Well, say some are in the Club World Cup, Man City in the Club World Cup. Just something to bear in mind. You know, for me, my opinion, I would look to, if I can, target obviously the fixtures that we've just spoken about, and then also look to pick players from teams that still have something to play for right up until the end of the season. I've got some sort of league stuff out the way in terms of fixtures and league table. We've got some stats now from 11FI, and what we've got here is a view of the clean sheet odds for the remaining fixtures of the season. A couple of standout teams, I guess, being Arsenal and Man City. Man City actually proving in recent game weeks that they can keep clean sheets in the Premier League. Arsenal, I still think, definitely one of the stronger defences. I'll tell you what, Everton, right? I did, on my deadline stream this morning, I was umming and ahhing about whether I should target Chelsea players, whether I should pick Palmer or whatever. And I did go for Palmer in the end, which we'll talk about in a second. Everton, since January the 1st, right, are the 4th best team in the Premier League. This is going into Game Week 34. Things might have changed a little bit given they conceded to Chelsea. But going into Game Week 34, they were the 4th best team in the entire league for expected goals conceded. Now, their fixture running is not the best. They've got a couple of fixtures there in 35 and 37 where their clean sheet odds are above 40%. So maybe their defenders could be on the menu. I guess it just depends on that nature of that Tarkowski injury, right? Because Michael Keane in defence does not shape up too well for Everton, even though, of course, they did okay, I would say, against Chelsea. Any other teams of note there, really? I mean, there's not a whole lot of excitement there, is there, in terms of clean sheet odds? I would say, really, two stronger defences or teams that I'd be looking to target is probably Arsenal and Man City at this stage from a defensive point of view. And I'd say it's a similar story in terms of projected goals, really. Man City are definitely clear in terms of, well, the rest of the league competition, to be fair, in terms of expected goals coming up. If we just go back to the fixtures, they're one of the most likely teams to have a double game week in 36 as well. Obviously, they're blank in 37, but I do think it's a... We'll see, obviously, how these FA Cup fixtures play out, right? You know, this video is made during the time of the Villa and Crystal Palace one going on, and Man City playing Forest tomorrow, right? But if they proceed in the FA Cup, they get through, most people probably tripled up, to be fair, on Man City already for double game week 33, but I'd definitely be holding on to my City assets and then thinking about doing something for 37. Other teams of note there, Liverpool. That's an interesting one because they probably won the league by the end of this weekend. What does that mean in terms of their attacking assets? What are their minutes going to be like? Are they really going to be going all in to try and score goals? I don't know. Newcastle, I think, is definitely a good shout. But again, with Gordon, you think Isak's going to be a good option. But then you look at the midfield with like Gordon, Barnes, Murphy, all kind of sharing minutes. Would you really want to go there long term? Spurs, I'm not sure you'd want to go there with them prioritising the Europa League. Chelsea, we'll talk about one of the Chelsea midfielders in a second. Aston Villa obviously got Rodgers. I think he's a great pick for the rest of the season. Brentford with Mbumo. Just again, I think he's a pickable asset. Don't get me wrong. Definitely think he's a pickable asset. But you just look at that league position that Brentford are in. They're kind of just in no man's land now, and they might become a little bit on the beach towards the end of the season. Bournemouth, they got a tough fixture against Arsenal in 35. But after that, you know, they've got some relatively decent sort of projected goals there. I think that's about it, really. I'll do it. I did a little bit of commentary there, but ultimately it's down to you from these projected goals, clean sheet odds to highlight some teams you'd want to target. I thought it'd also be useful just to look at, I think we've got how many players here? Maybe the top 18 or 20. I think this is 18 players. So what we've got here, according to Fantasy Football Hub, is the top 18 players for expected points for the rest of the season. Top 2 being Mo Salah, Cole Palmer, Isak, Saka, Mbumo, Cunha, Wissa, Raul Jimenez, Luis Diaz, Chris Wood, Martinelli, Marmoush, Sharda of Brentford. Interesting to see him there. De Bruyne, Mateta, Odegaard, Raya. Interesting to see a goalkeeper on that list. And Bruno Fernandes. The idea behind this, right, is I'm trying to give you, without necessarily drawing too many conclusions myself, I'm trying to give you as much information as possible in order to make transfer decisions at this stage. So you've got the fixtures, right? You need to be conscious of that potential double in Game Week 36, the implication of that, and obviously the blank in 37. Got to be conscious, I think, of the league table. You know, some teams, I think, will be more on the beach, so to speak, than other teams towards the end of the season because their league position is wrapped up in kind of secured. They're not going down. They're not qualified from Europe, etc., etc. And then we've got the projected goals, clean sheet odds that I've just showed you. That's another, I'd say, thing to factor in when picking players. And here you've got the Fantasy Football Hub expected points. So You know, your transfer decisions, I think there you should have a good bit of information, albeit the league table is going to be decided at the end of this weekend. And then, yeah, some teams are going to have, well, they're not going to have a game in hand because they doubled in 33. But at the end of this weekend, we'll have a bit more clarity on that league table because there's still teams, of course, with a game to go. But, you know, those are the things you need to be considering, I think, when making transfer decisions going forward. If I were to pick 3 players on this list that I think would be really good to have for the rest of the season, despite Wolves being on the beach, I think Cunha is going to be a really strong option going forwards. Marmoush, I think Haaland's probably due back before the end of the season, I think. But right now, I think Marmoush is a really strong option. Definitely think Isak, Salah are just shoo-ins at the moment. I don't mind Chris Wood as an option. He has just had his baby. CC Andy Martin for that one, but I do think he could be pretty good for the rest of the season. You know, Nottingham Forest, I think, are going to be playing until, well, the absolute death. I've just got the league table on my other screen. I don't see any Aston Villa assets on this screen, but I think picking some Villa players could be a good idea as well. You know, they're out of the Champions League now. Focus is obviously on the Premier League and FA Cup. They'll be going all in, I think, on European football. It's just a case, I guess, of with the amount of attacking options they have, who do you actually pick? Like Rashford, he's injured for this FA Cup semi-final with a knock, so Watkins is playing. That obviously doesn't necessarily mean that Rashford couldn't start the next game in the Premier League. So it's a little bit of a minefield there with Aston Villa assets. You don't see them on this screen. I think Rodgers is definitely up there as an option. I'd probably, even though I'm breaking my rule again of teams sort of being on the beach, got to say Mbumo, he's just always going to be solid. Probably alongside Wissa too, just in terms of minutes. Who else would I pick from this list? I do think Raya's probably the best goalkeeper in the game for the run-in. Probably. Bruno Fernandes. I'd love to pick Bruno Fernandes, but I just don't think you can. You know, Man United is just sort of floating in the league at the moment. You know, Ruben Amorim has been clear that, you know, he's prioritising the Europa League. So, I mean, just all of that in mind, it's quite tricky to highlight who I think some of the best players are. But yeah, hopefully with all that in mind, you can for yourself. All right, I usually do this. I call out one player for each of these buy and avoid videos. And I think today's subject is Cole Palmer. 3 assists in his last 10 appearances, I think, is simply not good enough for 10.6 million. Picked him on my free hit. I don't own him in the game in my actual team, but I picked him on my free hit draft, hoping for something against Everton, and he just didn't do anything. What's happened with him? What's happened with him? You know, he was, at one point, people were considering him as the best player in the Premier League. Certainly at points last season, people were. And some people were saying he's the best English player that was out there, but I don't think they'll be saying that so much anymore. And you look at the next 4 fixtures that Chelsea have got, and whilst they'll be battling until the end of the season, I don't think these fixtures are any good. Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Man United at home. You know, Chelsea, Man United is usually a relatively low-scoring game. And then Forest away at the end of the season. Like, I just don't really fancy Cole Palmer all that much. I'd certainly be looking to sell him if I had him in my team. And yeah, I think in my mind, I still believe that Cole Palmer is like the Cole Palmer of old. And he does, I believe, still have that player in him. But the form that he's in at the moment, he is not that player by any stretch of the imagination. And I think if I owned him, if I was one of the 35.8% of the game that still owned him, I'd probably be looking to offload going into game week 35. All right, well, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. It's a little bit different to my usual buy and avoid weekly videos where I go through lots of individual players, talk about their performances, etc. But well, quite simply, we've had less football in game week 34. And I think with the end of the season coming up, I think there's a more, is the word holistic right? I think there's more factors to consider around buying players and things that people would actually want me to talk about rather than just performance in the individual game week in question. So that's what I tried to do there. Used a lot of long words there, I think unnecessarily. But yeah, you've got upcoming fixtures, clean sheet odds, projected goals, the league table, considering teams that don't necessarily have anything to fight for, and then expected points courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub. So if you enjoyed the video and found it useful, well, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a like rating, subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. It should be just there on your screen. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next video.